for more than a decade, we've been conversing, and I usually take for granted, but it's always an honor to have such a British gentleman to talk to. And of course, your experience in Apollo and your knowledge and everything else is unsurpassed, absolutely unsurpassed. And I mean, the comments that came in on the last video up there into the Lion's Den, and you can see the comments that you're getting here, that people are ridiculing you on going into the British Society, and they were taking things out of context, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that we did this video and it's clarified, you see the responses that are here. But if you see the comments, they're very positive. They showed that they're clarified because these subscribers, of course, are looking at the other comments that were being made on the previous videos, right?
There's some good stuff there. Thanks,
Yeah.
guys. Thanks for taking the trouble to go through it, to understand what we had to go through.
This one, he said you should have interrupted Jerry or something.
Oh, that's great. I should have interrupted his opponent's presentation. Actually, it became quite embarrassing at the time, because it's noticeable that that part of Jerry Stone's attack on me was not included in the video. It was obviously edited out prior to posting.
You see this? Thanks for clarifying the details. He's referring to the other negative comments that were made, taking words out of context, and of course, taking the event itself out of context, right? People have to realize the venue that you were in, and being an English gentleman, you have to concede to certain things to be there. But see, they just go on and on and on, right?
Having a go at Jerry Stone there, that's good.
Yeah, well, you see, he's actually quite correct, because for a lot of years, I mean, I looked at all of the stuff, read the PDF files, you read all the details on the stuff, and you just take it blindly without actually looking at it. Why would you want to challenge it? And then all of a sudden you realize that, hey, they're showing that they had all these problems. Where's the PDF file that corrected them all, that showed that they accomplished this? That's when it really started to get me.
Yeah. That's one of the most damning pieces of information there is, that NASA are secretly, because they're not announcing it, secretly rewriting their original documents. Makes no sense.
And spending hundreds of millions and billions of dollars over 50 years to try and cover it up.
Yeah, they have. And maybe the people who did the rewriting are beginning to question some of the problems that NASA claim to have overcome, such as protection from radiation, protection from the vacuum. They've started to question it. Maybe this is why NASA are in such a flat spin about the whole thing right now.
Well, there was one comment in the previous video going, oh, we've had 50 years and can't prove anything, right? As a matter of fact, nobody is challenging us, or if we're wrong, they should correct us. They can't do that. The information that has been put out there for many, many years, they cannot debunk. They make feeble excuses and everything else. There's a couple people going, well, you've had 50 years and you're not able to do it. Well, it's not up to us. It's up to NASA to prove their claim was in fact true. And the only way to do that is for them to go to the moon. I mean, after 50 years, with the advancements we've had in technology, we should be having daily flights.
Of course we should.
Look at the aircraft. How long did it take to get commercial aircrafts in the air? How many thousands of aircraft are in the air right now? How many millions of people are flying right at this very second? That's advancement in technology, and they've had more than 50 years.
Yeah, they have.
We don't even have daily flights to even the edge of space. We don't have commercial aircraft that are flying at 100 or 150,000 feet. None of that has been developed either.
No, it hasn't, because it's so difficult to do it.
We're trapped into that basically 35,000 feet for a commercial aircraft.
Yeah, some of them did fly a bit higher than that. Concorde flew a bit higher.
I've looked at the Concorde, and they said that they were only flying supersonic over open water, and they were subsonic when they were flying over land because of the noise that it's going to make, breaking the sound barrier. However, if you're above 42,000 feet, it won't reach the Earth anyway. So why would they be flying subsonically if they're high enough up that sonic boom won't reach the Earth? But all these comments, like it just goes on and on and on. This guy says you were the king of the beasts. Into the lion's head, and you turned out to be the king of the beast. That's excellent comment. So this guy, I read the description. Got to get some butter and toast for this one. He's going to sit down and watch it, right?
Oh, that's great.
Our viewers do appreciate you being here and speaking. Sarcastic here. I've spoken to him on Skype a few times on here, and he comes up with all kinds of things like who's operating the camera on those two different shots, right? Robert wanted me to pull this up on the video. There's the TV camera. And then right there, this is the TV camera shooting back. He's driving it. See? Well, how the hell can you have that? Because that TV camera is coming off of that high gain antenna,
which is moving around.
And there's no way it can be connected. And he's gone through here and he's taken different video shots, and then it comes back and he shows it one more time going in there. He's showing other stuff from what the TV camera is. And then here's the manual controls on it that we discussed.
That's right, yep.
In the thing. And when he put this together, there's another shot of the manual controls. But then it comes back and he shows it again. Here it is driving along, and that's the TV camera.
If it's a TV camera, how are they recording that information? They say they were transmitting it direct back to Earth, but they couldn't.
Right. The first image of them moving on the rover is the DAC camera. And you can see that it's the DAC camera. Right there. That's the DAC camera. And you can see the TV camera in there. And then it switches around. And of course, Robert also mentioned the fact that when the TV camera is moving, that you get that rainbow color effect on it.
Yep.
Like that's a Hasselblad still shot. That shot there, that's them moving. That's the DAC camera. But you can also see the position of the antenna. It's just pointing that way straight across. You can see the camera is pointing at the driver right there.
Yeah.
Then it switches to that camera right there. You can see the color. That shows you that it is the television camera that's actually there. That can't happen because the high gain antenna would be bouncing around all over the place.
Yeah. One
hell of a mess. This website is still up and available from Angel Fire. I'll just let you discuss Xavier Pascal.
Yeah, that's on the owlist.com website. Definitely worth a read of that. Xavier Pascal regrettably passed away last year, but his background as an aerospace engineer and as a computer scientist enables him to identify the problems within the Apollo descent computer. And he shows on the site regular illustrations. This is Xavier Pascal illustrating the powered descent initiation, illustration of the lunar module with all the various antenna and rendezvous antenna and EVA antenna, docking window. It's the only other view they had outside. So the idea that this computer could control the lunar module as it landed on the moon is fantasy, absolute fantasy. It couldn't possibly do it. And yet we're being asked to believe that it could. There's an interesting comment at the end of this article about Xavier Pascal. Well, two of them. There's one which shows the command module orbiting the moon because it's photographing above the command module with the moon, the lunar surface, or what passes as the lunar surface, behind it. So obviously it's above, but it's not orbiting in the correct position. This is another thing that Xavier was able to point out, that the center of gravity is different from the center of the mass of the command module and the service module.
Well, they would obviously have a problem. First problem with them on the descent is the fact that they're standing up and they're just tethered off. They're not even strapped in. The second thing is arm, as you're rocking back and forth, you're trying to operate a joystick control, so your whole body's going to be shoved into the controller. And they never were able to accomplish that in simulation.
They couldn't do it in the test. They couldn't do it on the moon.
No. And nobody had the skills to do it because for each of the missions, it's the first time for that person. And death do you part when you have those problems. The other thing is that, well, I'm sure Xavier has put it in there as well. As they're descending, the center of gravity goes very much to the top end because the fuel being burnt in the descent stage part of it's getting lighter and lighter and lighter. As the center of gravity moves upwards, where the thrusters are going to be more sensitive. Each inputs want the thing to tumble over even quicker, right? They never practiced that. And to follow that up, if you watch Elon Musk's last launch, as it went up, the first stage became empty of fuel and it tried to separate. It tumbled and they couldn't control it, even with the best computers, because it was top heavy.
There's so much that's wrong, so much that we can now identify using, because we've got the computers here to do it. There's an interesting comment that's made right at the end of the article. Comment on this investigation by an Apollo researcher with inside knowledge and experience of the space industry. Monsieur Pascal's conclusions are correct, as far as I can determine, without spending a great deal of time analyzing the work. Some of the documents that Xavier Pascal is critiquing are not after-action analytical reports, but rather they are the theoretical position papers of an experimental mission that could not be observed. They represent what the original planners assumed would happen in a perfect day, in a perfect world, or on a good day. Often such papers are not thoroughly vetted, as it were. As long as they appear correct, the execution of the thrusting maneuvers, if actually performed, would end up visual flight rules, VFR, technical term that. In this case, however, the goal of the mission was to prove to everyone that the mission was successful. After-action critiquing of the actual mission execution served no purpose and in fact could be counterproductive. I don't believe that anyone at NASA ever considered there would be domestic challenges to the accuracy of the report. In order to bolster mission successes, other empirical evidence was provided, albeit the source of that evidence remains in doubt. The bulk of the material provided after each mission was the so-called photographic records, recording of radio transmission, and some rock samples. Moon rocks? Query? Literally nothing related to the Apollo missions was corrected after the missions. They are now. Spokesman for NASA, when pressured, would offer some curt response to critics, but no comprehensive explanation of glaring anomalies was ever offered other than satirical retorts and excuses provided by sycophants. I think that sums it up rather well. This is somebody with insider knowledge and experience of the space industry.
Even in this diagram here, where he's talking about the center of mass on it, and he said, this is how it's going to orbit with its nose down. He's showing that as a fact. Well, there's where the mapping camera is, and that thing has to be pointing at the moon all the time to do all those photographs that they took orbiting around to do all the mapping. And he's sitting here saying, well, this is the only way it can orbit, because that's the center of mass, nose down. And then NASA's got all these nice photographs from this camera. And of course, this thing was supposed to be in rotisserie mode at the same time. And then how does that camera point at the lunar surface continuously when it's not in rotisserie mode? And this is how it's going to orbit because of where the center of mass is. So once again, fake photographs. How do you have a cue card that has a rock that's maybe a little bigger than the size of a football, 18 inches across? How did you know that that was going to be there for Station 5 on a particular mission, that you're going to land there and it's going to take this many minutes to drive there in the rover? And the cue card also shows you the mineral contents inside the rock before it's split open. But they were able to do that from an orbital photograph?
That's what they want us to believe, because that's what they worked out beforehand would happen. So the photographs had to show it. It's all a storyboard. The whole Apollo program was a storyboard.
What I think is the best photographs they've got are taken from telescopes. They can't pull the resolution in for any kind of detail on what NASA has created, these very small craters and everything else that they were so-called on their landing areas. And if they actually were to go there, those details will not be there.
No, they won't.
It's not just that the equipment won't be there, but don't forget, they have named these craters. When you look at them, they're driving by, like you're in Apollo 15 and there's Dune Crater, and that's, and you go to Apollo 17, there's, Shakespeare Crater and all the other ones that they're at, and Shorty Crater and all that. Those are fairly large craters, but not what you could pick out by a telescope. They won't even show up. The craters you see on the moon in a telescope or even a good set of binoculars are hundreds of miles across.
It could be that some of that information came from the lunar orbiter, not the lunar reconnaissance orbiter. The lunar orbiter launched in 1966 to look for potential landing sites for Apollo. And it did photograph the lunar surface. I said photograph because they used film. They didn't have digital cameras back then, not in 1966.
But did the film work?
That's the other question.
So are those photographs real?
If the cameras and the film was contained on the lunar orbiter within a pressurized environment,
which they claim they were,
then it may well have been able to record those details, because the photographs were developed on board the lunar orbiter, they were scanned, and then the scan was transmitted back to Earth. So you've got fairly complex equipment on it, and it's possible that it did have it. This was around the time that the Hexagon spy satellite was being developed, which had similar type of restriction on atmospheric pressure. So it included its own pressurization on the spacecraft. So the two were probably working in tandem with each other, trying to work out the best way to do it. Because if photographic film is destroyed in a vacuum, which we know it is, then how could they use that photographic equipment without it being pressurized? And nobody's ever disputed that it was pressurized. Nobody's ever disputed that photographic film has to be pressurized to maintain its integrity. Those photographs of the moon taken prior to 1975, which includes all of them, all the ones allegedly taken on the surface, the 5,771 photographs taken on the lunar surface with the Hasselblad cameras and a Kodak Ektachrome film, were taken here on Earth under controlled studio conditions, because none of the photographs show any damage that would be occasioned by the vacuum on the lunar surface. Prove me wrong, guys. Come on, you sycophants, you NASA supporters. That is a correct statement. They could not have been taken with photographic film on the lunar surface. Digital, yes, that's different. Photographic film is destroyed in a vacuum, as we've also proved that is the case, using relatively simple equipment, relatively low levels of vacuum, certainly not at the level that would be encountered on the lunar surface, torr 10 to the minus 12. Even at the International Space Station, it's still torr 10 to the minus 6. And at the Kármán line, named after Theodore von Kármán, a NASA scientist who decided that's where space started, and if space, which has nothing in it, is such a deterrent to human use of space, you have to be protected from the effects, not only of radiation, if you go far enough out, and only the Apollo astronauts ever went far enough out, allegedly, without telling us how they were protected. Then you've got the vacuum of space, which gets increasingly harder the further from Earth you go. No person at NASA has ever commented on that. And a lot of the equipment was classified until 2012, when it was declassified. And that's when we could start to examine it. And we found so many problems with NASA's description that it's more like a fairy tale than a true record of what they supposedly achieved. They didn't achieve it. None of them did. None of the Apollo missions achieved what they said they had. They couldn't do it. And as for Apollo 13, we'll leave that for another time, I think.
Oh, it's just unbelievable, isn't it? Even a digital camera today, because the electronics, circuit boards and everything else are so fine, it doesn't take very much radiation or anything else to damage that, or cosmic particles or whatever that are passing through to damage those. They actually have to build them larger and stronger and then harden them with a lot of lead around them to protect them. But even a digital camera has a shutter.
Yeah, it does.
And it could cold weld. Now they still have to deal with that.
That's one of the effects of a vacuum, isn't it?
Digital camera has batteries, and they're going to have to build them special so that they can operate.
So they don't leak. Where are the special batteries for use in space? The Hasselblad only used regular Vata batteries, and it was unprotected from the vacuum. It was unprotected from the radiation. And let's not even worry about the heat, because obviously it would work in the heat as well.
This is on nickel hydrogen batteries. Apparently, NASA has developed these things since about 1975. And this NASA Parrot program, is what it is saying how much better these batteries are. And they say they're NASA batteries. Without watching the entire video, what he's talking about is how safe the batteries are. These are nickel hydrogen batteries. They're building them like car shocks or whatever, so they have a pole on each end and a cylinder. So you have nickel and hydrogen gas under pressure, and he's saying how safe they are, and they're showing shots of them. Oh, well, we shot them with bullets and punched a hole in them, and they don't blow up. I mean, the Hindenburg kind of blew up, had that stuff in it, and if you actually create a spark when you're hitting something with hydrogen, it's going to blow up. Well, they claim that they are better for space because temperature doesn't affect them and this doesn't affect them and all kinds of stuff. And he's also claiming that you could recharge them 1,000 times a year for 30 years, these nickel hydrogen batteries. But if you Google nickel hydrogen batteries compared to lithium ion batteries, what you will find is that nickel hydrogen batteries last 2 to 5 years, do a couple hundred charges and they're done. You have to temperature control them because it's compressed gas. If you heat the cylinder up, it's going to blow up unless you build it strong enough. And in this video, they're claiming that it's more dense than lithium ion. And if you also look that up, you'll find out that lithium ion is twice as dense as nickel hydrogen. And then you've got the weight of this battery cell itself. But this particular video is promoting it for NASA, claiming this is the future. They're going to put these in the satellites and everything else. These batteries will last forever, and they recharge them with the solar panels. That's what they're doing. And they claim they've been doing it since 1975, since they invented these batteries. And I've never heard anything about them before, and I have studied all the documents on all of the batteries from NASA. I think I've downloaded every PDF file I could find on batteries. I never heard of a nickel hydrogen battery until I saw this. They put NASA and say, oh, it's the future of energy. That's what it says in the thing. Well, this is supposed to be the next greatest, biggest thing out there. Well, if it's been around since 1975 and they haven't developed it, you know. But at the same time, when you look up what a nickel hydrogen battery is, which is, it is a real battery, and they show you its drawbacks, its physical weight, its lack of density, and the fact that it's done in a couple of years, it's not even close to what lithium ion is.
Looks like there are people out there desperately trying to cover for NASA. They're probably the people who watch our films without telling us that they do, look at the points we make, decide that we are probably correct, almost certainly correct, and are desperately trying to ensure that NASA are covered from any further adverse publicity.
Well, if this is their latest technology, right, and you have this particular website, by the way, has 1.25 million subscribers, and this video has 1.1 million views in 6 days. Anybody can Google what this battery is and see that it's not anything what this man is claiming it is. Like I said, if NASA has had it since 75, why isn't every bloody device out there using this technology battery, right? It's so simple to make.
Yeah, but it doesn't work.
I mean, you could take your grandmother's silverware and put it in a hydrogen thing and create a battery out of it, right?
Talking of that, are you aware of a YouTube channel called The Why files.
Yes.
Okay, they've got a new one out recently called The Biggest Lie Ever Told. It's about the Apollo moon landings.
Yeah. Yeah, I watched it.
He made some good points, but he didn't actually arrive at a conclusion.
That's the whole thing about the Y files. They put it out there. He puts enough counter in it for NASA to support them and keeps going. And of course, the Y files, they have a team of researchers. They never looked at our stuff. They couldn't put that in their videos. You think they've been watching us?
I think they have, because there were one or two little comments that JP, the presenter, I think Hecklefish was trying to make a couple of points to indicate that they were aware that there were more than the problems they were discussing out there, because they didn't mention vacuum once. And vacuum is now something which people are fully aware of. So why was that? Because if they had mentioned it, they would have destroyed the whole NASA narrative, especially as regards the photographs.
Well, that and the newest suit that they've come out with, like the latest suit they've come out with costume designers on it. Oh, that's just a covering to hide the intellectual property underneath, not the helmet. I mean, the helmet closes down. It doesn't even have a latch on it to seal it against a rubber seal, and the pressures on the inside is going to blow it straight off their face. Where's the intellectual property there? I mean, it is a movie designer costume, and that's all there is to it. And there is no intellectual property underneath it, and that's what they're trying to hide. But they've been doing it since Apollo, when they started putting Mylar over top of everything to cover up nothing.
Yeah, saying that the white suit reflected the heat and the sunlight. No, it didn't.
But if you're making a spacesuit and weight is a consideration, why would you have a costume over top of the suit? Just for looks? Just for the movie industry? Just for whatever? Doesn't make sense to me.
No, because the movie industry was what was behind it.
Exactly. Just put that statement out there. Intellectual property. We're hiding our intellectual property. Well, first of all, is NASA not a very open source government industry? Right? So they don't have intellectual property that's being hidden. It's not designed for military bases. I'd like to see them test this at Sandusky.
Oh, they're not going to do that. It'd be far too expensive to get the Sandusky chamber in operation.
And then when they're finished there, they can walk through 3 Mile Island with them to make sure the radiation's protected.
There you go.
Or Chernobyl, or we can bring them up to the Bruce Nuclear Power Plant, where they are the authority in radiation.
Yeah, they should know what they're talking about.
Well, the Bruce Nuclear Power Plant is the CANDU reactors, which were sold worldwide. And Bruce Nuclear Power Plant has the best people from all over the world working on it. It's also the largest facility in the world.
NASA are not interested in learning about radiation.
Well, they might want to be, because they're AI robots, which will be the next things going into space. They're going to want to know how the electronics are affected by the radiation.
It'll be the luck of Apollo. That was the comment that I got when I asked the question about how was Apollo survive the CMEs and all the other radiation in space, when I attended a lecture from one of the scientists at the Harwell Atomic Energy Research Establishment here in Oxford. Oh, it was the luck of Apollo. That's all they can say.
They've always gone for animation and everything they could. I mean, they took Charlie Brown cartoons, they took Snoopy from that, and there's the Snoopy helmet, and they had him as a mascot and everything else. That was done for a particular reason. It was for media purposes, to get people interested, right? Because back in the 60s, everybody watched Charlie Brown cartoons.
Yeah.
Everybody knew who Charlie Brown was and who Snoopy was. They're just drawing on that by putting a Snoopy helmet on and having a Snoopy as a mascot, especially Apollo 12, I think, featured it mostly.
It basically makes you think of a cartoon. It's diverting attention from the fact that they couldn't do what they were claiming to do.
None of it seemed to be serious when you start looking at it at that aspect, how they marketed it. And they had all the cereal companies sponsoring them as well, because you get a prize inside, it'd be a little plastic spaceman or whatever the hell it was. And then you had Tang. all of those things that are sponsoring them. Omega watches.
A big advertisement in the UK papers, Omega watches. The Moon Watch, they call it.
They got one for the Artemis project now, Omega watch. They're not going away.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear.